When Karen arrived with spike strips ready to blockade my driveway farm, she was convinced she'd finally backed me into a corner. She claimed it was all an illegal modification and ordered her crew to lay the jagged traps across my driveway, destroying the space I'd worked so hard to cultivate. But Karen didn't realize her heavy-handed tactics would expose her ultimate oversight, a glaring legal exception she was too arrogant to notice. Beneath the layers of her smug declarations, she'd made a mistake so big it would unravel everything she'd worked to control. Karen showed up early that morning, her convoy of trucks rumbling into the cul-de-sac like a declaration of war. I stood on my porch watching as she stepped out of her shiny SUV, clipboard in hand, and smugness radiating from her posture. She wore her usual CEO of the neighborhood attire, a pristine blazer, sharply creased pants, and oversized sunglasses that barely hid the glint of superiority in her eyes. What Karen didn't know, as she barked orders to the crew laying down the spike strips, was that the one detail she overlooked would be her undoing. When Karen and I first met, it wasn't exactly neighborly. I had just finished unloading some tools from my truck and was admiring the small garden I'd been tending in the front yard when the screech of tires shattered the peace. I turned around to see a shiny SUV barreling toward the curb, kicking up a cloud of dirt as it veered too close to my property. The car came to a halt, but not before one of her tires dug deep into the edge of my garden, flattening a row of flowers I'd just planted that weekend. I stared in disbelief as Karen stepped out, barely glancing at the damage her car had caused. "You need to move that junk!" she barked, pointing at my truck like it was a rotting pile of trash. "It's blocking the neighborhood aesthetic." I blinked, still processing what had just happened. Excuse me? Your car just tore up my garden." Karen didn't even flinch. "That wasn't a garden, it was an unkempt patch of dirt, and besides, I had to park somewhere. Maybe next time, don't let your property look so neglected." As if to add insult to injury, she slammed her car door shut and leaned against her SUV, pretending to check her clipboard. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack. I turned to see part of my wooden fence swaying ominously. It had splintered where Karen had hit it while pulling up. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "You just broke my fence." Karen waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up from her clipboard. It was probably already falling apart. If it was a proper fence, it wouldn't be an issue. I stared at her, stunned. "You're not even going to offer to fix it?" "Fix what?" she said, finally looking up with a smirk. "Maybe this'll teach you to get sturdier fencing. Honestly, you're lucky I didn't scratch my car on it." I ended up repairing the fence myself later that week, spending hours fixing the damage while Karen drove by each day, offering zero acknowledgement or apology. That was Karen's introduction to me, and it left no doubt in my mind. This woman was going to be a problem. The next morning, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was none other than Karen, Patricia, and Richard, each looking like they were dressed for a courtroom rather than a casual HOA intervention. Karen wore her trademark blazer, clipboard in hand, while Patricia stood to her side, glaring over her oversized sunglasses. Richard, looking slightly less composed than usual, was clutching yet another letter. "Good morning," Karen said, her tone as fake as her smile. "We've come to discuss the, situation with your driveway garden." I crossed my arms, forcing myself to stay calm. "Situation? You mean the vegetables that seem to offend your HOA sensibilities?" Karen's smile faltered. "This isn't about sensibilities. It's about community standards. Property values are at stake," Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And we thought we'd give you one last chance to do the right thing before the board takes, well, stronger measures." Richard stepped forward, handing me the letter. "This is an official notice. If you fail to comply with the removal of these so-called agricultural implements, the board will escalate matters legally. This neighborhood has rules, and no one is above them." I raised an eyebrow, carefully opening the letter. "Legally? I've done my research, Richard. Nothing in your bylaws prohibits container gardening. And let me remind you, selective enforcement is grounds for legal action. I've got photos of every unapproved shed, lawn ornament, and even your oversized shed." Richard's face flushed red, but Karen quickly interjected, her tone cold. "We don't need to argue. The letter speaks for itself. Comply within 72 hours, or face the consequences." As they turned to leave, I noticed Patricia whispering something to Karen. I couldn't make out her words, but Karen shot a glance back at me, her lips curling into a smug grin. "Oh," she added before stepping off my porch, "be sure to check your driveway. I'm sure it'll be enlightening." Sure enough, when I walked outside later, I spotted something glinting in the sunlight. Spike strips. They'd laid metal spike strips right at the entrance to my driveway, boxing in my car like I was a flight risk. My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the strips in disbelief. I called the police immediately. Officer Davis arrived within 20 minutes, his eyes widening at the sight of the spikes. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, kneeling to inspect them. "And this is all because of tomatoes?" "Tomatoes, peppers, and zucchini," I replied, my frustration boiling over. "And because certain HOA members think they're above the law." Officer Davis straightened up, shaking his head. "Look, HOA disputes are usually civil matters, but this is dangerous. Spike strips aren't just over the line, they're illegal. Someone could get seriously hurt." I pulled out my phone, showing him the certified letter and the security footage of Karen and Patricia placing the strips. They didn't even try to hide it. "They're escalating because I won't back down." Officer Davis scribbled notes in his notepad. "I'll file a report, but you might want to take this higher. County zoning, maybe even a lawyer." A lawyer. Diana Ross immediately came to mind. I'd worked with her before when the HOA tried to fine me over my mailbox, and she'd demolished their arguments in record time. I called her that afternoon, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. "They've really outdone themselves this time," Diana said after a long pause. "Spike strips on private property are a major liability, and since they're installed without your consent, it could classify as criminal mischief or even endangerment. Let's make some calls." 2 days later, I walked into the HOA's special hearing, armed with Diana, my legal documents, and a flash drive of evidence. The room was packed, neighbors craning their necks to see who would walk out victorious. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. Richard called the meeting to order, his voice strained. "Tonight, we're addressing the ongoing issue at 476 Oakwood Drive. This homeowner has repeatedly violated community standards, and the board has voted to take legal action." I stood, my voice calm but firm. "Your board's actions are not only unethical, they're illegal." Karen snorted, flipping through her clipboard. "Oh, please. We've followed every rule. You, on the other hand, have made this neighborhood an eyesore." I turned to the crowd, holding up the county initiative. "This document says otherwise. Container gardening is protected under county law, and selective enforcement is a direct violation of HOA regulations." The room buzzed with murmurs. Patricia stood, her voice shrill. "He's twisting things! That driveway farm is a health hazard." "Health hazard?" Diana interjected, standing tall. "Or a convenient excuse to push your own agenda? Because we've also documented the spike strips you and Karen installed, a blatant violation of both state and county laws." Karen's face froze, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to come up with a response. The tide of the room had turned, and for the first time I saw a crack in her unshakable confidence. And then the doors burst open. A figure in uniform strode in, holding a clipboard of their own. "We've received multiple complaints about illegal obstructions and endangerment. Who's responsible for the spike strips?" The tension exploded into chaos as neighbors turned toward Karen and Patricia, their voices rising in accusation. Karen stepped back, clutching her clipboard as though it could shield her. Patricia sputtered, trying to shift blame onto Richard, but it was too late. The house they'd built on intimidation and lies was finally crumbling. The metal screech of Patricia's file rasping against one of the spike strips yanked me out of my thoughts. I rushed outside to find her crouched on my driveway, her designer scarf fluttering in the wind. She was fiercely sharpening the spike edges as if they were weapons in a medieval armory. "Patricia, what are you doing on my property?" I shouted, anger surging as I stepped closer. Patricia jumped to her feet, nearly tripping over her expensive loafers. "Oh, what a coincidence! I was just, taking a walk." She gestured vaguely toward the street, clutching the file behind her back like she hoped I hadn't seen it. "Taking a walk? On my driveway? Sharpening spike strips?" My voice rose with disbelief. "Do you even realize how insane this is?" Patricia's face flushed crimson as her composure crumbled. Well, someone needs to deal with your disgusting garden. The board won't tolerate it, and neither will I. You've already trapped me in my home with illegal spikes, and now you're vandalizing my property further? I pointed toward the strips. You're not just trespassing, you're escalating this to harassment. She stepped closer, her voice shrill and defensive. This entire neighborhood deserves better than your agricultural mess. I'm protecting community standards, Jackson. Don't you care about property values? I shook my head, my fury tempered by disbelief. You don't care about standards, Patricia. You care about control. And this proves just how far you'll go to keep it. Neighbors began stepping out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Dave from down the street called out, "What's going on here?" Ellie peeked over her fence, concern written all over her face. Patricia noticed the growing audience and turned to them, raising her voice as if to rally support. Do you see what we're dealing with? He's turning our community into a vegetable farm. Someone has to act before it's too late. Dave crossed his arms and looked her dead in the eye. No, Patricia, someone needs to act on you. Your obsession with this garden is ridiculous and illegal. Get off his property! Patricia huffed, stepping away from the spike she'd been sharpening. Fine, she snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. But mark my words, Jackson, this isn't over. She stormed off, her file clattering to the pavement as neighbors whispered and shook their heads. I picked up the discarded tool, holding it up for the crowd to see. This is who's been running the HOA, someone who sharpens spikes to trap people on their own property. The black SUV screeched to a halt across the street, and out stepped Richard, looking visibly shaken. Patricia followed behind him, her oversized sunglasses firmly in place, but I could tell she was flustered. Her posture was stiff, her movements too precise, as though she was trying to maintain control of a situation spiraling wildly out of her hands. What is the meaning of this circus? Richard barked, waving his arms toward the news vans. You're turning this into a media frenzy over a few, what, vegetables? Patricia scoffed, adjusting her sunglasses. This is a private HOA matter. We demand these reporters leave immediately. The reporter held her ground, microphone in hand. Mr. Thornton, care to comment on the spike strips allegedly installed under your direction? Are you aware they could be considered unlawful detention or a safety hazard? Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. No comment, he snapped, trying to block the camera lens with his clipboard. This is an internal issue and we'll handle it appropriately. I stepped forward, feeling a surge of confidence as the cameras turned toward me. Internal issue? I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. You trapped me in my own home and sabotaged my property over tomatoes. This is about power, not rules, and you're finally being exposed. Neighbors started emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd, people whispering and pointing at the spike strips. This is ridiculous! Patricia hissed under her breath, leaning toward Richard. We need to shut this down now! But it was too late. One of my neighbors, Sophia, stepped forward and addressed the reporter. You want a real story? Talk to the rest of us. I've been fined 3 times for planting flowers Patricia didn't like. They only enforce rules when it benefits them. That's right, called Dave from a few houses down. My basketball hoop's been here for years, and suddenly it's a problem because I spoke to her about the garden. More voices joined in, each one adding to the growing wave of outrage. The reporters eagerly jotted down notes, their cameras capturing every angry face and pointed accusation. Richard tried to regain control, raising his hands as though commanding silence. Enough! These claims are baseless. The HOA board acts in the best interest of the community. By breaking the law? I interrupted, holding up the subdivision's original covenant. This document says otherwise. It explicitly protects my right to grow food on my property no matter what you or Karen want to enforce. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, people craning their necks to get a better look at the paper. I walked over to the reporter, handing her a copy. It's all here. They've been trampling on our rights for years, but this proves they're the ones breaking the rules. Patricia's carefully crafted composure cracked. That's ancient history. Those clauses don't apply anymore. Diana, who had arrived just in time, stepped up beside me. Actually, they do, she said coolly. Your bylaws cannot override legally binding covenants set during the development of this land. And installing those spike strips? That's a criminal matter now. Richard stammered, his clipboard trembling in his hands. This is a misunderstanding. We were acting in good faith. Good faith? Another neighbor, mister. Johnson, shouted from the crowd. You've been hiking fees and handing out violations for years just to line your pockets. Patricia turned to flee, but one of the reporters blocked her path with a microphone. Mrs. Peterson, do you deny targeting specific homeowners and enforcing selective violations? Her voice shook as she tried to respond. I need to check on my dog. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, 2 police cars pulled up, their lights flashing. Officer Martinez stepped out, followed by an official-looking man in a suit holding a clipboard. We've been reviewing the complaints, Martinez announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs. And the installation of spike strips qualifies as unlawful detainment and property damage. He turned to Richard and Patricia. You're both going to need to come with us for questioning. The crowd erupted into cheers. Neighbors clapped, high-fived, and some even hugged me. Patricia's face turned ghostly white as she protested. You can't do this! I'm the HOA president! Richard wasn't any better, yelling, This is all a setup! You'll regret this, Jackson! The reporters captured every moment as the police escorted Richard and Patricia to their cars. Diana turned to me, a small but triumphant smile on her face. Looks like justice has finally caught up to them. I nodded, finally letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The spike strips, the sabotage, the endless letters, it was over. Or at least the worst of it was. As the reporters continued their coverage and neighbors gathered to celebrate, I couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of hope. This wasn't just a victory for me, it was a turning point for everyone who had been bullied by Karen's reign. As the crowd continued to cheer, the last spike strip was finally ripped from the ground and tossed into the maintenance truck. A heavy weight lifted off my shoulders as I watched the barriers disappear one by one. Physical proof that the HOA's intimidation tactics had been dismantled. Dave from down the street slapped me on the back, grinning from ear to ear. You did it, Walker! You took on the HOA and showed them they're not untouchable! Ellie stepped forward with her husband, unveiling the handcrafted sign they'd made, Maple Creek Community Gardens, growing together. The colorful design, adorned with painted vegetables and cheerful sunflowers, almost brought tears to my eyes. Ellie smiled warmly. Your fight wasn't just about your driveway garden. You reminded us we have rights, too. This is just the beginning. As neighbors surrounded me with congratulations and offers to help rebuild my garden, Patricia and Richard's black SUV pulled up at the end of the street. They stayed inside for a moment, as though trying to gauge if the crowd would turn on them. When Patricia finally stepped out, she did so cautiously, her movements stiff and deliberate. She still wore her oversized sunglasses, but they couldn't hide the scowl twisting her face. You think this changes anything? She snapped, her voice shrill. We'll be appealing the court's decision. You might have won this round, but we'll be back. I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I turned to the crowd and raised my voice. Let them appeal. We stood together today, and we'll do it again if we have to. Richard stepped out of the SUV next, his tie loose and his expression bitter. This neighborhood has standards you've completely destroyed. You've made us a laughingstock. Dave, standing beside me, crossed his arms. You did that to yourselves, Richard. We're done being bullied by you and your board. The tension hung thick in the air, but Patricia and Richard quickly realized they'd lost control of the narrative. Without another word, they climbed back into the SUV and drove away, their tires screeching as they rounded the corner. The crowd cheered louder at their retreat, the atmosphere shifting from tension to celebration. Ellie's husband handed me the first signed petition for the new community garden, the paper already filled with enthusiastic signatures from neighbors who wanted to join. This land behind the playground has been wasted for years, Ellie said, her voice full of hope. We could turn it into something beautiful, a real community space.